G'day guys, and welcome back to another video, and we have another pre-release just around the corner. Time has flown by. It is absolutely crazy. We're going to have the OP04 pre-release very soon. So for you that may be attending your very first pre-release event, there's a couple of things that you should know. Now, these events are run in one of two different ways. The first is a constructed version, which is where you bring your OP03 decks to the event, battle out that way, just your normal rules, all that sort of stuff. The other way is a sealed event, which is the more fun, the more preferred way. And basically how that works is you'll take your own leader, you take your own Don cards to the event, you'll get given 6 packs, you'll open them and you'll build a 40 card deck from those packs. Now there are a couple of different deck building rules for the event. The first is there's no copy of cards restriction amount in place. So you can run 1, 4, 6, 10, 20, 40 of the same card. That's no problem. The other alteration to the rules of deck building is there's no color restrictions in place. That means if you have red leader, you can run blue cards, yellow cards, black cards. That's no problem. The only thing that still remains in terms of a color rule is if you have a card that says, say, search for a red card, or it targets a red card, you can only target or search a red card. Those color rules are still in place, so keep that in mind. Now that we know the basics for how these events work, in today's video we're going to look at some leaders that'll be great to take to these events, some cards that are probably a definite must include in your decks that you build, and then some cards to fill those gaps from what you have left over. We'll also talk about some optimal kind of ratios of certain cost cards, certain events, blockers, all that sort of stuff as we go along as well. So if you guys do like today's video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and support us that way. And then also let us know your feedback down in the comment section below, or if you have any other tips, tricks that we may have missed in the video that you want to share with everyone for their pre-release events, please do so in the comment section as well. First off, let's have a look at some leaders that you can take to your pre-release events. And as a great general rule of thumb, any leader that has a very generic effect is going to do really well in these events. So as you can see here, we've got some great options. Probably your Zoro and your Starter Kid are probably going to be your best ones. Zoro, just a general buff to everything, really nice to see. Captain Kid, quite easy restand effect there by resting 3, trashing a card, setting back as active. The other ones that are really good is your Katakuri, because you can get 7k swings quite easily every time with your leader, just by adding that 1 extra Don. You can look at your life. You can, there are some cards you can maybe manipulate a little bit there in terms of that. You can also take a sneak peek at your opponent's life as well, see if you want to change some things for them there as well, so that can be quite handy for you. The other card leader that would probably be pretty good in these events is Yamato. As you're low in life, you become Whitebeard, 6k body that they have to kind of navigate, which can be pretty good. Those little power differences make a big difference in these sealed events. Now, some other leaders you can think about also taking along are some of these right here. Most of these have fairly generic effects, which is really cool to see. So things like your Ivankov here, when you have 0 cards in hand, draw 2, probably not going to come up super often, but if you want to try and challenge yourself, go for it that way. Rob Lucci, a great alternative to Kid as well. You can get some good restand by trashing 2 after you KO something with Rob Lucci, so a great one to run there. Doflamingo is the only new one we probably put on this list here. We usually want to stay away from 2 cost leaders in these sealed events because generally they have less life to work with, which can be a bit of a detriment in these sealed events there, but the effect is actually pretty good, which makes it a little bit more viable than other ones we've had previously. So end of your turn, you can set 2 of your Don cards as active, so it always allows you to have access to some nice events. There's some characters that like to use active Don on your opponent's turn to rest things, so yeah, the Doflamingo can be a great option there. Luffy is another great one with a very generic effect. You can move a rested Don anywhere on your board to a character, which is really great to see. Crocodile can be a nice form of general removal. You are minusing yourself a lot of Don there, so sometimes that's not super nice. Probably just want to use a kind of late game, which mainly where it is probably most effective. You can get rid of some blockers and other things like that to help you close out a game. This Crocodile's not a bad option. Kaido is also not a bad option. You can Don -7 to trash a life, usually used to trash your opponent's last life. Charlotte Linlin, great one to kind of manipulate your life a little bit there. So also another viable option. And then Luffy is also another viable option. It gains a rested Don every time something is KO'd. And it's not a once per turn thing, so you can add multiple Dons to Luffy in one turn from that effect. So let me know if you're going to run any of these leaders. You're going to challenge yourself a little bit rather than running the kind of expected to be really good ones. Yeah, let us know how you go with those. Right, next up, we're going to talk about the 2K counters. First of all, you definitely want to max out your 2K counters. There's only, let's see, Apis and then Miss 13, Mr. 13 and Miss Friday, I believe, are the only common ones that we have access to. The rest are uncommon and rare, so you definitely want to max out on all of these. The more 2K counters, the better. Capone is definitely the best one, so if you see that, make sure you're running that in there. The trigger is absolutely wild. Up to one of your opponent's leaders or character cards cannot attack during this turn. Bart's another great one because it is also a blocker as well, so fulfills 2 roles right there. The rest of them don't really have great effects, and Sasuke is the other one that might be used as an on-play thing, so you get to return all the cards from your hand to your deck, shuffle it, and redraw the same amount of cards. Next up, we're going to have a look at the blockers. So the blockers, you probably want to run anywhere between like 4 to 8 blockers in your deck. You can run a bit more if you do see some more. Some of them have really cool effects. Others are just your standard kind of blocker there. Dio is just your standard blocker, fairly cheap one. It's a common as well, so you can maybe get multiple of them and you can spam out. Yokozuna is another great kind of blocker here. So 3 cost 3,000. It also has a counter, which is nice to see. The effect is on your opponent's turn, you can Don -1, return one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less to his hand. Now, there's not a lot of 1 cost. There's a few 2 costs you'll probably see running around. 1 cost you're probably not going to see any, maybe 1 or 2. We've already spoken about Bart. Pound is another bit of board control you can get out of a blocker, so you can block, and then on KO you can put something with a cost of 3 or less in your opponent's life face up at the top or the bottom. Now, Miss Merry Christmas and Sanji are probably your 2 best blockers that you can have access to, especially because they have triggers that allow them to be played out from life. Miss Merry Christmas, you can Don -1 to play the card, and it's a 4K blocker. Sanji is a 5K blocker. You can trash a card to play it. So yeah, both really cool to see some trigger blockers that we have access to. Diamante is probably another really good blocker that can be quite aggressive. 5 cost 6,000 body. Don ×1 end of your turn. If you have 2 or more active Dons, set this character as active. So if you leave a couple of Don up to use some events, or maybe you have the Doflamingo as a leader, you can make that quite viable, so you can get some good aggression and good defense on your turn. Mr. 4 is potentially a blocker, not always a blocker. You do have to Don -1 to get a blocker effect, but it does go up to 7,000 power if you do that. So a big hefty body. Generally you want to use this late game, definitely not early game, so you're not ruining your ramp and your curve. And then Sobo is a great blocker that gives protection to a lot of your cards, also helps with your hand. So the on play is your characters cannot be KO'd by card effects until the start of your next turn, and then you can also draw 2, trash 2. Right, next up we've got our events. And so our events, you probably want to run around 4 of your counter events. Your removal events, you can add a couple of extra of those on top. Your best ones out of these right here will definitely be your Happiness Punch, your Barrier, and your Spider's Web. But let's go through them all here. So your Table Mounted Kick costs 0, discard a card, something gets 3,000 power during the battle. So cool to have a 0 cost that we have access to in this format. The trigger is something loses 3,000 power for the turn. So a nice little bit of defense from the trigger. Happiness Punch is a 1 cost, essentially a 2K counter. You're not buffing something by 2,000, you're minusing one of your opponent's leaders' characters by 2,000 for the whole turn. So great on those cards that can restand, which there are some that may be running around. And then if your leader's active, you also get to minus something by another 1,000. Colors Trap is not a bad 1 cost one. So it's a cost you 1, you also have to minus yourself 1 Don to buff something by 1,000. That doesn't seem so great. The other part of the effect is then you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So you can get 2 essentially blocks counters from 1 card. The trigger is a classic purple trigger where you get to add yourself an extra Don, ramp up that way. Weakness is an unforgivable sin, is a 1 cost Don -1 1000 counter. So it's not the greatest one there, but if you don't see any other counters, it's not a bad one to include there. It is also ramping yourself through the trigger. Barrier is a 1 cost 2000 counter, and then if you have 15 or more cards in your trash, it becomes a 4000 counter, which is absolutely wild. The trigger, you can draw 2, trash 1, but you're probably going to want to use that main counter effect there. The Spider's Web is a 2 cost 4000 power counter, and then you also get to set one of your characters as active after you use that. Dragon Twister is another 2 cost 4000 counter. The other part of the effect is you can place one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 1 or lower to the bottom of their deck. That effect's really going to be found to be effective. As I mentioned previously, there's probably only one cost character that you're going to want to run out of the cards we have access to, so it may come up if you do see that. But the trigger is actually fairly good. You can return one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less to the bottom of the deck, so the trigger definitely makes that worthwhile to run. Next up, we have a couple of 6k counters that we have access to. So we have a purple one and a yellow one here. So the Nespalm Cannon, something gains 6000 power during the battle, and then you can add 1 Don card from your Don deck and set it as rested. So it costs you 3. Really cool to have a 6k counter available to us. Diablo Jumbe is another one there. Basically the same thing. Something gains 6000. Then if you and your opponent have a total life count of 4 or less, you can KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 2 or less. So yeah, a few more targets there because of that 2 or less, but there's not going to be a whole lot of targets right there. So those are all your counter ones. The rest are kind of removal cards that we have access to. We'll start with Heavenly Fire, probably the worst one that we have access to in terms of our removal, but still can be okay. So cost you 1, then you get to set one of your opponent's characters cost of 3 or less in their life at the top or the bottom face up. The trigger is basically take a card from your life and replace it with a card from your hand, so that can be cool if you have some nice triggers or events you want to pop in there. Treno is the next removal card that you have access to. It's on main, so you can KO something with a cost of 4 or less, but if you have 15 or more cards in your deck, that you can KO something with a cost of 6 or less. The trigger is you may rest your leader, KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 less. So you do have to have an active leader to use that trigger, which you're probably not going to have a lot of in the sealed format, but that main removal effect can be quite handy. The weak do not have the right to choose the way they die. Nice mouthful there. Is actually a really cool form of removal. So this is activate a main and a counter, so you can use it both your turn and your opponent's turn. You can rest one of your opponent's characters, no restriction as to what you can rest, and then you KO something with a cost of 6 or less. Wild. The trigger, you can set it 5 Don active. The last removal card, the best form of removal that we have access to in this format, which is Gumbum Red Rock. Basically bottom decking anything. The trigger, you can return something with a cost of 4 or less to the bottom of your opponent's deck. So that main effect is what you want to run it for. Bottom decking anything. There's some big things that we have to have access to, so your opponent is lucky enough to see some of them. Hopefully you're lucky enough to pull one of these, so you can just return it to the bottom of their deck. All right, next up, these cards are probably still on the must include in your deck. So Sanji we've got here is the best 1 cost going first card that we have access to, so if you see it, run it. Charlotte Mascot, great card because it's got Banish. Banish can be really good because either way your opponent is either ditching a card from hand or trashing a card from life, so a great way to control your opponent's hand size there. So you get the Banish by adding 1, by having 1 Don attached, so always swinging for 5, so your opponent always has to do something. And it also is a trigger, you can trash a card to play the card. Great form of pressure through that trigger. Daddy Madison is another great card because you can get some super aggression while protecting him most of the time. So the effect is Don ×1, and if your turn set this character as active, you got a base power of 5000. So yeah, always protected. There are a couple of cards in the set that allow you to attack into active characters, so just be mindful of that, but otherwise this card's gonna be a bit of a menace for your opponent to deal with. Next up we have a super rare, which is Pell. So most likely not going to see this, but if you do it, probably definitely run Pell. Don times 1 when attacking KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 4,000 power or less. There's a bunch of those that you can do. Hits most of your blockers as well. Only a few of the blockers are 5,000 or more. So yeah, great to have Pell there. Zoro, another great one to run in the deck on play. Give one of your opponent's characters minus 2,000 power for the turn. It is a 5 cost 6,000 body. So yeah, it just makes clearing board a little bit easier for you. And basically just run it for the artwork. If you're not going to run it for the effect, the artwork looks pretty sick. Next up we have Cavendish, which is a 5 cost 6,000 body. Don times 1, this character can attack active characters. Great way to control your opponent's board, especially in a sealed format. The other effect probably not going to really use. It's when attacking, you can rest your leader, KO something will cost a 1 or less, and then you can trash 2 cards from the top of your deck. Sanji is the only 1 cost probably going to run around, so you're probably not going to use the other effect. Treblo, awesome card. 6 cost 6,000 body. On play, you can KO one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 5 or less. Already great. And then on your opponent's turn, when they attack, you can rest 2 dons, set one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less as rested. Not once per turn either. So you have multiple don up, you can rest multiple characters with this effect. Vanillas are always going to be strong in a sealed format. We've got a bunch of them here in this set. A lot of 5 cost 7 power ones. So we've got the Roki, we've got the Banana Gator, we've got the Law, and we have the Randolph, all 5 cost 7,000 bodies. Great to run there. We do have a few 6 cost 8,000 bodies in Kuro, the 2 Giants, and the Perospero. So yeah, definitely want to run a bunch of those in your deck there. Bounce back over here to the Luffy, which is 7 cost 7,000 body. You can attack active characters all the time with Luffy. The other effect is actually pretty cool. So you can activate main once per turn, return 7 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck. You can set Luffy back as active. He just can't be restood during your next refresh phase, but that's alright because you can also activate that effect again to restand him during your main phase, so you can swing with him there. So you can get 2 attacks in 1 turn with Luffy. Great way to control the ball, great way to maybe finish the game as well. And then last of all, we're going to be looking at Monkey D. Luffy, which is very similar to your mascot, is a card that has Banish. 8 cost 9,000 body. Banish is wild for your opponent to deal with. Now moving on to the cards which you'll use to kind of fill up some space if you've got some space left over. First up, we're going to have a look at Sugar. Sugar is a super rare, so probably not going to see Sugar in your cards that you pull, but if you do, great. So the effect is on your opponent's turn, once per turn, when your opponent plays a character card, if your leader is a Donkey Kong Pirates, rest one of your opponent's characters, then rest this card. So great if you're running the new Doflamingo. So if you run that first effect becomes absolutely insane. And then the on play is you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. So sometimes it's a great way to just close out the game. You can rest one of your opponent's blockers. Most of them are 4 cost or less. A couple of them are 5 cost. So yeah, it can be a great way to close out the game. Carmel is another card you can chuck in there to fill some space. 2 cost, 1,000 body, 1,000 counter. Your turn on play, draw a card. Does have a trigger, but the draw, you won't get the draw from the trigger. You will, however, be able to KO something with a cost of 2 or less from the trigger. So that can have some targets there. Jack is just a great form of draw power on KO. You can draw a card, 2 cost, 3,000 body. Ulti is an okay card, 3 cost, 4,000 body, 1,000 counter, Don times 1. When attacking, you can return a character with a cost of 2 or less to the owner's hand or the bottom of the deck. Few targets, as I said, is that 2 or less is, you're not going to see a lot of them. Giola is another card we can run in to fill some space. So 4 cost, 4,000 body, 1,000 counter. On opponent's turn, you can, when they attack, you can rest 2 Don, rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. Once again, it's something that's not once per turn, so you can have multiple things going on there. Usopp can be a great form of removal. 4 cost, 5,000 body. On KO, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with original power of 5,000 or less. Mr. G is up next. End of your turn. If you have 3 or more active Don, KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 3 or less. So a lot of requirements there. Sometimes you do have those 3 cost counters that you want to have going, or you have a mix of your 2 and your 1 cost events to play. This effect can come up. It is a 4 cost 5,000 body, so not a bad stat line there. Miss All Sunday is another great one to run. 5 cost, 5,000 power, no counter though. Keep that in mind. You do want to limit the amount of cards that don't have counter in your deck. On play, add 1 rested Don to your Don area, and then if you have 6 more Don, you can draw a card. Also, you can do the trigger to -2 Don to play the card there. Chin is a 5 cost, 6,000 body, 1,000 counter. Don ×1, when this character battles and KOs your opponent's character, you can draw 2 trash 2. So it can be a great form of draw power to have going on for you there. Kinemon is a really cool finisher actually. 6 cost, 6,000 body, no counter. You activate main once per turn, rest 1 Don card. You may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life to set this character as active. So at the end you can get 2 swings of 15 with him there. So you just need 1 extra Don. You're adding 9 on, so you got 15 there. Swing, trigger the effect, swing for another 15, which can be absolutely insane. Next up we have King, which is 7 cost, 8,000 body, 1,000 counter. The on play is just draw 1, so that can be handy to run. Mr. 5 is another one we can possibly run. 7 cost, 8,000 body, no counter. On your opponent's attack once per turn, Don -2, you may rest this character, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 4 or less. So that can come up. There's a lot of things you got to meet there to get that effect off, but the 7 cost, 8,000 bodies, nice to run too. Crocodile is an 8 cost, 9,000 body. On play, Don -2. If your leader includes Baroque Works, place up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life, so you can recover if you can recover if you want to run Crocodile as a leader. And then on your opponent's attack once per turn, Don -1, draw 1, and then trash 1. So a great way to kind of dig for some more counter power. Yamato's not a big bad boss that you can run there. 9 cost, 9,000 body, no counter. On play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the total life of you and your opponent added together. Then if you have 1 or less life, you get to recover 1 life. Doflamingo, 10 cost, 10,000 body. On play, a total of up to 3 of your opponent's rested characters or leaders cannot become active during their refresh phase. So a great way to kind of control how your opponent is playing, what they're doing. You can make them basically do nothing for a turn. And then Kaido, this is like your biggest body that we have access to, which is 10 cost, 12,000 power. On play, rest up to 1 character with a cost of 8 or less, and then up to 1 character with a cost of 3 or less gets bounced to the owner's hand. And the rest of the cards you just kind of fill in with what you have access to. Generally with your pre-release you want to have most of your costs anywhere between your 4 to 6, maybe your 3 to 7 is basically when you have most of your stuff gathered around that kind of cost for your characters. Have say around 4 of your bigger characters that cost you 8 to 10, and then some of your lower ones there as well. So you have some sort of play on your first couple of turns, or some little extra bodies that you can do to build yourself some good board presence. And that's all that we have for you today for our tips and tricks for the upcoming pre-release events, if I can English my way through this. If you do have any other tips or tricks, let us know down in the comment section below. But thank you so much for checking out today's video. Stay beautiful, and we'll see you all in the next one.